Ah, my dear fright-seekers, prepare to descend into the twisted tale of Anthony Lugen, our first malefactor in tonight's countdown of wickedness. We find ourselves at the chilling number 10, the very brink of our wicked journey, and I assure you, this story is no mere child's play. Anthony Lugen, a man whose sinister heart harboured violence and malevolence, stood before the gavel of justice, seeking to weave a web of deceit. He sought to paint himself as a reformed character, a man who had seen the error of his ways. But the cold, unfeeling eyes of justice saw through the facade, my friends, and he was sentenced accordingly for his dark deeds, including the savage beating of a child. But oh, the horror did not end there. As Lugen was led from the courtroom, his vile nature bubbled to the surface once more, his eyes filled with the fires of rage and revenge fixed upon his ex-girlfriend, and he mouthed threats of unspeakable nature. The very air seemed to freeze with his venomous words, and it took the strong arms of the law to restrain this wicked soul. Imagine, my dear fright-seekers, the moment of reckoning, the moment when a convict hears their sentence. Some take it with grace, others with despair, but then there are those who react wildly, uncontrollably. Tonight, we'll delve into the top 10 convicts who reacted wildly to their sentences. As we slither down to number 9 in our grim countdown, brace yourselves for the nightmarish tale of Michael Thomas, a youth whose age belies the darkness within his soul. A mere child of 17, this wicked creature embarked on a path most foul, leading him to a date with destiny in the court of judgment. Found guilty of first-degree reckless murder, Michael's wicked deeds were laid bare for all to see. But instead of remorse or repentance, what did this fiendish boy display? Why, a fit most terrible, a tantrum of rage that shook the very walls of the courtroom. The gavel had fallen, the sentence was passed, and the cold reality of punishment began to close around young Michael. But instead of accepting his fate with the sombre resignation of one who knows he has done wrong, Michael's soul erupted in chaos and fury. His face twisted into a mask of anger, his body writhed and fought, and the very air seemed to crackle with his malevolent energy. We venture further into the heart of darkness as we reach number 8 in our twisted tale of human malice. This time our spotlight falls upon Lance Dyer, another young soul ensnared in the web of wickedness. A youth of but 17 years, this misguided boy found himself caught in the iron grip of justice, a moment that would forever change his life. Lance Dyer, you see, had committed a crime most heinous, one that sent shivers down the spines of even the bravest of men and women. With a gun in his hand and malice in his heart, he pulled the weapon on a police officer, a guardian of the law. But fate would not be kind to young Lance, and he soon found himself convicted and sentenced to 11 chilling years behind bars. But the horror of this tale does not end with Lance's sentence. Oh no, dear ghouls, there's a twist that adds a new layer of fright to this already grim story. As the judge proclaimed the sentence, a wail of despair rang out in the courtroom. It was Lance's sister, her voice filled with grief and anger, shouting that the ruling was not fair. We now descend deeper into a tale that chills the bone and curdles the blood, for at number 7 we find a man whose name has become synonymous with betrayal and horror. Larry Nassar. Larry Nassar, known to many as the team doctor for the United States women's national gymnastics team, wore the mask of a healer, a trusted figure to whom young athletes turned for care and guidance. But lurking behind that mask was a monster, a predator who used his position to commit unspeakable crimes. This wicked wretch was sentenced for his dark deeds, including sexual assault and child pornography. Yet it's what happened in the courtroom that brings us a moment of terror that stands out even in this grim tale. Picture the scene, dear ghouls. The courtroom, filled with the heavy weight of justice and the haunting cries of Nassar's many victims. Among them, the father of 3 victims, a man whose soul was tormented by what had been done to his daughters. In a voice filled with anguish and rage, he begged the judge for a moment alone with Nassar. A chilling request that sent shivers through the room. The desperation in his voice, the raw pain in his eyes, were a testimony to the horror that Nassar had wrought. Ah, gather round, my morbidly mesmerized mates, as I unveil the dread-laden tale of Michael Marin at number 6. A tale that takes a twisted turn into the macabre, leaving us aghast and haunted by its darkly poetic justice. Michael Marin, a man of wealth and stature, concocted a nefarious scheme, a plot most foul, driven by greed and deception. He set his mansion ablaze in a wicked attempt to commit arson and insurance fraud, hoping to cash in on the suffering of others. Found guilty of his heinous crimes, Marin was trapped, cornered by the relentless jaws of the law. But this sly fox had one more trick up his sleeve, a final act that would shock the courtroom and send chills down the spines of all who witnessed it. As the gavel fell and his fate was sealed, Marin reached into his pocket and produced a small capsule of cyanide. With the cold determination of a man who had chosen his own dark path, he swallowed the poison, sealing his own grim fate. O my wicked wanderers of the courtrooms and chambers of chaos, gather round and hear the tale of Jaleel Hoskins at number 5. A tale that thrusts us into the shadowy recesses of rage, rebellion and remorselessness. A story where horror meets the halls of justice. Jaleel Hoskins, a name now etched in infamy. A man found guilty of the most heinous of acts. A mother of 5, a beacon of love and life, brutally extinguished by his hands. A crime that chilled the very marrow of those who bore witness to its cruel aftermath. In a moment of unhinged fury, he seized the podium, that symbol of speech and reason, and hurled it towards the judge, the embodiment of justice. The room erupted into bedlam as officers rushed to restrain him, his face twisted in a mask of unrepentant anger. Gather round, my sinister spectators, for the tale of number 4, where justice meets despair in the dark dance of destiny. In the life of Jaleel Smith Riley, crime, conviction and crushing defeat wove a tapestry of terror that unfolded before the eyes of a courtroom full of onlookers. Let me take you on a journey into the macabre mind of a murderer, where remorse is a stranger and punishment becomes a nightmare. The reality of his eternal confinement, a life without freedom, without hope, brought him to his knees. He fell to the floor, not in an act of defiance or rage, but in a moment of sheer, overwhelming despair. The weight of his deeds and the enormity of his punishment converged in a moment that transcended mere justice. Observers, those lucky or cursed enough to witness this tragic spectacle, were caught in a whirlpool of conflicting emotions. Pity and horror, relief and revulsion, all swirled together in a storm that left no heart untouched. The tale of number 3 is a dark waltz danced by 2 wicked women, Erica May Butts and Shanita Latrice Cunningham, a dance that ended in a courtroom cacophony of crime, punishment and 2 shattered souls. Are you prepared to peer into this pit of perversion? As the courtroom's doors creaked open, the 2 women were led to face the judgment of not just a legal system, but of their own conscience, which had been corrupted by their loathsome lust for cruelty. The judge, a stern harbinger of justice, stared into the void of their eyes and proclaimed the inevitable yet shocking sentence: life without parole. The words hung in the air like a funeral bell's toll, a sombre symphony to the end of their freedom and the beginning of a lifelong torment. And then, as if the strings of their very beings were cut by an unseen scythe, both women collapsed. They fell to the floor, not in defiance or anger, but in the overwhelming realization of their eternal damnation. We have reached the penultimate performance in our grim gallery of guilt and grief. Allow me to weave the woeful story of Brandon Spencer, a tale of despair, dismay and doom that hangs heavily like the fog in a haunted graveyard. 40 years. The sentence was uttered with a gravity that echoed through the room, reverberating in the hearts of all who bore witness. 40 years of darkness, despair, and the cold, unfeeling embrace of confinement. 40 years to reflect on the choices that had led him to this precipice of peril. It was too much for Spencer, too heavy a burden for his weary soul to bear. In a moment of utter despair, he crumbled like a castle built on cursed ground. His body gave way, and he struck his head on the table, a physical manifestation of his internal agony. We have reached the ghastly grand finale, the crest of our cruel and chilling cavalcade of calamity. The tale I unfold now is that of Kiara Cook, a sorrowful saga steeped in shock, suffering, and the stark reality of retribution. Our protagonist, young Kiara, a mere 18-year-old sprite, found herself ensnared in the wicked web of crime, entangled in an act of robbery that spiraled into the shadows of violence and ended in a shooting. A grim deed, my ghostly gathering, one that summoned the spectre of justice to her doorstep. The courtroom, that hallowed hall of judgment, became the stage for a drama most dire. The eyes of family, friends and strangers bore into Kiara as her fate was to be sealed. The judge, a figure of authority and arbiter of earthly law, looked down with an expression carved from stone. 20 years. The sentence was spoken, a grim tolling bell that resonated through the courtroom and into the very soul of Kiandria. 20 years to be locked away. 20 years of youth and hope snuffed out like a candle in the wind. The reaction was immediate and gut-wrenching. A scream tore from Kiandria's throat, a primal cry of disbelief and terror. She reached out, her arms grasping for the familiar comfort of her mother, her voice a desperate plea for mercy, for understanding, for a second chance that would never come. As we leave behind our grim gallery of guilt, let us reflect on the lessons learned, the warnings whispered in the winds of fate, and the understanding that we are the masters of our destiny. Farewell, my fearful followers, until we meet again in the shadowed recesses of our darkest dreams.